Hello, and thanks for taking the time to have a look at ApprovalPlus. Just got a few slides to run you through first to give you a background of what the system is and what it does and who uses it. And then I'll dive into the software and show you how it all works. So ApprovalPlus has been developed by Fusion 5. It's around about 18 years old, and it's been designed really specifically for the procure to pay process. So it's not a generic workflow tool that you make workflows and things out of. It's something that's fit for purpose, and it's got a lot of settings and system options and things inside of it to be configured for how people pay their bills and look after their organizations. So really we're using the ERP system as our source for data, so suppliers and GL codes and things are coming across. We're getting through the process of paying bills and getting them back to the finance system and updating the general ledger and making them ready for payment. And really the process of getting to that point is all about what ApprovalPlus covers. So if it needs to be matched to a purchase order or generate a purchase order and handle any over approvals, or indeed have an invoice coded and approved by users, that's what it's all about. And some of those invoices can have different flavors, if you like, and control features around them. So for expense claims and credit cards, for example, you can have different people approving them. And there's obviously a different workflow to get the tasks and documents into that process. So I'll cover a little bit of that off as we go through the demo. As I said, it is a fit for purpose solution. So it's been designed specifically around the procure to pay process, and it has particular controls and features because of what it is. So it has things around the accruals at month end and commitment tracking and things to prevent fraud and enforce things like segregation of duties in the process and things too. How it all works is we get an ERP system sending that data to us. We're obviously sending purchase orders out to suppliers if needed, and we're getting invoices back in. And we're using an OCR process to read those invoices and help to automate some of that process. For the credit cards and the expense claims, we're using a mobile-friendly device and taking photos of receipts and things as part of that process and getting them into the process for approval and getting them back to be paid. ApprovalPlus is really looking for ways of automating as many of those steps where it makes sense. So we don't automate things that need a person to review them, but where, for example, you had a purchase order for $1,000, it's been receipted and an invoice comes in through that OCR process and refers to that purchase order, then we could automate that match and no one has to touch that one. So it could be a touchless process. Or we're looking for exceptions and other parts of that workflow where we do need people to be involved. So for example, if an invoice comes in quoting a purchase order but hasn't been receipted yet, we can automatically generate an email off to the person who created that purchase order and give them access to the invoice to see the detail and do their receipt, and then the receipt match can happen afterwards. So that process can be changed around and manipulated a bit in the process to do other things. And so, for example, that's used for standing purchase orders quite often by our customers, where they're raising a purchase order for a service or a set of products for the year, and they're chipping away at that purchase order during that time. Not everything has to be related to a purchase order, so invoices can come in and we look for ways of assigning them to the right people automatically. So that might be based on a bit of information on the invoice, such as a business unit number or maybe the email address that the invoice was received by and then forwarded into this process. We can determine who it goes back to and who gets that as the invoice to be prepared. So that's the person who does the GL coding and then on for approval. And obviously your accounts payable people still look after the process and manage the ones that need some help and their analysis. So it's they're still involved in that process and they will have oversight over all the ones that are in process too. And there's quite a variety of customers using ApprovalPlus, and they're sort of spread all across New Zealand and Australia, and really across all sorts of industries. So we've got a few councils and government departments, and we've got corporate entities and not-for-profit organisations, and really sort of range anywhere from around about 20 users up to about 1,000 at some sites. And the general sort of common thing is that they're all obviously paying their supplier bills, but often we're doing things in a different space around the purchase orders for them, and that may mean interfacing to their ERP system for those purchase orders for stock, or it might mean that we're sourcing information and creating buyer created invoices and things in that process sometimes too. An ApprovalPlus project's reasonably simple to deploy across your organisation. It's often takes up to 12 weeks, but that really comes down to how you want to roll it out and really manage the process of change within your organisation. So you are going to be changing how people do their jobs and automating some tasks and coming up with new things. So, for example, a lot of organisations where the first time they've actually raised purchase orders for their services and their corporate spend, and it's a change for them. So it's just a matter of going through those processes with their staff and getting them trained up and ready to go, and not pushing that, if you like, and also still delivering your day job as part of that time frame as well. Our typical approach is to deliver an out-of-the-box solution. So ApprovalPlus doesn't have any modifications or anything I guess specific to most organisations that needs to be coded or anything into it as part of the delivery. If we need to do any specific interfaces or any extra workflows and things like that, we can do that as a separate little piece of work. But it's the idea is to get a project in and running, and then focus on the extras later if we need to. As I mentioned, there are a lot of changes going on with ApprovalPlus in an organisation, so we look to make sure we help you guide your team through the process of change management as part of our project as well. Right, so we're going to go to ApprovalPlus and sort of show you a bit of everything with it and give you an idea of the look and feel. So I'm going through a login screen here at this stage. Can also have single sign-on, so you can integrate with a service that you already have. When a user logs in, they can use any device. They might be using a tablet or an iPad, for example, or their computer. And the idea is you can log in from anywhere via the internet and get into the service. This is summarizing the tasks that are in front of me. So I, for example, as an accounts payable person, have this task here of 15 documents that need some processing. I've got some documents that need coding and approving and things like that. And it's summarizing those things. We will get notifications by email sent to us to say when there's a task that's been assigned and things along those lines, and they have links in those emails too. But a lot of our users will act from here. So for example, I've got 11 documents that need approving. I can come in here and click the play button on that and it'll take me into those documents. It might be that I've got an expense claim such as this one to approve, where I can see the expense claim receipts. I can see a little summary report about the expense claim that's been claimed, the total amount that's been claimed, and all the detail from the users that have done the data entry. And that may be all an approver needs to see. They can hit the approve button and move on to the next document, or they may want to drill into some detail. So for example, they can see all of the GL coding, any asset numbers and work orders and things that relate to those transactions. And in fact, in this case, it's the expense claim document that's been attached to that particular line item as well. They may also want to look at the history of who's seen a document and done anything to it, so such as when it was created, who approved it and rejected it and things like that. So the idea is that all that information is available to people during and after the process to maintain a good, strong audit trail as part of this process. All of the actions that our user can have are on the right-hand side, and the most logical one for them to do for the next step is highlighted in green for them, but we might be doing things such as disputing a document or adding extra attachments and comments and things as part of this process. This is an expense claim, but if we skip on and have a look at the next transaction in our list, we could be using the same screen for approving any sorts of documents. So for example, here, this next one is an invoice. We've got a comment that pops in as we come in here. We've got our header, we've got our invoice and where it's been coded to. So it's the same screen that was used for that expense claim, but we're going through, and in this case, we know that it's an invoice that's been prepared and it's in dispute. So we can't actually approve that one until we've resolved that dispute. So there's other things that can go into that workflow process as well. Okay, if I go back now, and we're going to go back to our home screen, I'm going to go through the process of creating a purchase order and sort of give you a bit of a look and feel for how a user who's creating a document interacts with ApprovalPlus. So I'm sort of saying new purchase order. And really the process is designed to take over from often people using paper purchase order books and things like that. So to help them, we give them a purchase order. As we're doing something, we'll see it starting to fill out. Our data entry fields help users. So the red highlight, for example, tells us this is a compulsory field, and we know that we need to type and select a supplier from the list. So we can actually pick a supplier by using the arrows and scrolling through lists, and that's how all of our fields work. Or you can click into the field and type ahead. So for example, if I type and pause, it'll find things with the name word paper in it, or I keep typing, it's going to type ahead and we can find a supplier that we want. Okay, and all of the fields are designed to help the user. So for example, this next one here, we could click on the start typing in there, and it'll remember the descriptions we used for this supplier in the past. And it's just designed to help you with data entry or some consistency in that process, that you can use the same descriptions and things, or just make it easier for people who aren't good at typing. And that might even extend to, if I wanted to put a day in here, for example, I can hit T and it puts today's date in there. Okay, there's some options here around quoting and hiding amounts on purchase orders and things like that. And I'm going on here to create our purchase order and keep on going. You'll see the purchase order is going to start filling out some of this information now for us. Okay, and we're going on to then say what it is we want to purchase from the supplier. Now for ApprovalPlus Gisborne, I've loaded in the catalogue of items. So these are the things that we can actually buy from that supplier, and you can just update that into an Excel spreadsheet. And the idea of using that really is that you can actually grab the items and the descriptions and item codes and prices that have come from your supplier, and it makes your purchase order easy to create, but it also means it's accurate, and there's a good chance of some more better automation when the invoice comes on and later in the process too. And we could be defaulting the GL coding here for an item as well. Or in this case, for example, we've limited these parts of the chart of accounts that a user can have access to. And so what that means is that we can sort of say this user can only access this business unit or this division or department or something of an organization, or maybe even go right down to the particular account codes that they have access to. You can also search in here and find a GL code. And we can display budgets and actuals that are attached to that GL code. We can limit other fields that people can select from, or make some of those compulsory based on the GL code combination, for example. And the idea is that all of that information can flow back into your general ledger, and you can do reporting on that, or you can do some reports within ApprovalPlus on these details as well. The final thing on this particular item is we need to choose someone to approve it, and we'll be presented with a list of people who can approve a combination of this GL code combination for this much money and who are attached to me as an approver. And there's a whole myriad of ways of setting up approvers in the background to achieve that. In our little demo environment, we can choose different ones. And I'm going to choose myself and save that. There are some options here around copying lines and creating copies of old purchase orders and things like that too. Okay, so that's our purchase order created. We can see what the supplier is going to see when we send them a purchase order. We can also attach other documents to send with that purchase order to the supplier, or you can attach other documents that are just there for part of the approval process or for background information for looking at them later. And that's just a useful way of doing things. We might add comments to other people in the process, and they don't go outside of the organization. They just stay inside of ApprovalPlus for your other people in the process. And the idea really is that we've now added the things we want to buy, the GL coding information, the prices, maybe some background attachments and some comments and things like that. We send it to the approver, and they're seeing all of that. So I'm going to get a little summary here. It's waiting for me to approve it as an approver. We get that last comment. And again, the same screen's used. We've got the total amount that's going to be purchased from the supplier. We can see the details on the purchase order. We can drill in and look at the GL codes in the history, just like I was doing when we looked at the expense claim before. Okay, so for an approver, they would approve that, and then this purchase order can go on into the process of being ordered from a supplier, and we can handle all of the emailing and printing out of the purchase order document and sending in the other attachments that were done earlier in the process if we want to at that stage. Okay. The concept here is we can do some other things as part of this ordering process. So for example, we may bring through contacts out of your ERP system for the supplier, and you can select from those, or users could be typing in a particular email address at this time and doing it manually, but they may also want to include some little instructions such as please deliver after 3 o'clock or something like that. And the idea is that you can include that as part of the ordering process and include where you want things to deliver to. It'll default your office location and your name, for example, but you might want to send that to someone different as well. Okay, so we've now emailed a purchase order off to our supplier. The status has changed inside of ApprovalPlus, and we're waiting for the goods and services to come in. Now, you wouldn't normally do this all in one process. If I just go back to my menu and show you how a user interacts, we'll store those purchase orders against the user and track the ones that are going to come in for receipt when we get those goods and services delivered. So for me, I've got some sample ones just sitting in here. We can go and have a look at the list. The one I wanted to do is this one we just created now. I would normally have a purchase order number on a delivery docket and things like that. Just click in here. And to do a receipt's a very easy task. If I had lots of line items, I can just go down and tick the ones that I did receive, or I can receive the whole purchase order, or I can go in and do a partial receipt. So for example, if I had ordered 12 items and I've only got 6 of them today, I can do a partial receipt and do some other receipts on other days and things like that as well. Or in fact, the price could have changed in between the time that I thought what it was when I ordered and the suppliers updated that. So you can do those sorts of things. Or it may even extend to adding an asset number or work order code at the time of receipting these things as well. Okay, and really the concept from that point onwards is all of that information that we put onto the purchase order is now available to the invoice when we receive it. So for example, if a purchase order is all at that state and ordered and ready to go, and an invoice comes in from our supplier now for that amount of money, quoting that purchase order, we can take the GL codes and the information off the purchase order and apply it to the invoice, do the approvals automatically and send it through to your ERP system to be paid. It can take away a lot of the process of approving invoices later on and get it all done up front based on the purchase order approvals. So just some options there. For those organisations that don't want to go down that purchase order path, or they may want to have a mix, we can do all of those things on an invoice as well. So for example, have a look at an invoice that needs approving here. This screen is sort of showing us this is an invoice and it's going through a similar process that we would be doing to a purchase order without a purchase order. So we see the invoice, we've got a total amount that's going to go through the OCR process, which I'll show you in a second. And someone's gone and coded these lines and sent to someone to, or in this case to 2 people to approve. And so these approvers could approve their piece. And once the invoice is fully approved, it can be sent to the ERP system for payment. So it doesn't have to have a purchase order in that mix. It just is a useful thing for some tasks and some processes as part of it. Okay, so before we go off to the OCR piece, I'm just going to sort of show you there's a little bit of other tasks that people can do around what we've just seen. So for example, if I wanted to search for any invoices that have been through the process as a manager and see things that related to my business unit or to me, for example, I can come in here and say, I want to have a look at all invoices where I was the originator, or maybe I want to compare particular suppliers' invoices and things like that. And so you can do a search, and the idea is that all search documents can be drilled into and looked at. And you can use that same screen we just saw before when we were doing our data entry on invoices and purchase orders. And the idea is you see all that information, you can see the history, or if it's been matched to a purchase order, all those types of things is bound into the system and available for people to use. Okay, if we want to go back to our search list, you can keep on looking through different invoices and things like that. Or in fact, you can actually narrow that search down and say, well, actually, I only want to see the ones where I was also the approver as well as the originator. So you can start changing that search result list and drilling down into a little bit tighter list as well. Okay, the other things that are important in this process is that people obviously have holidays or they go away for work and things like that. So users can delegate their duties to other people. And really, you can set as an organisation some rules in place around who can delegate things to each other. So for example, as I go to delegate my tasks, I can choose which things I'm delegating. So I might be delegating all of my roles or just my coding and approving, for example, or choose per module. And you can choose who they can delegate to. So you might set a group of users up, for example, and only those people can delegate to each other. And then that stops, for example, your CFO from delegating their approval duties to someone without sufficient approval level inside of your organisation. So you might say managers can only delegate to other managers, for example. Okay, you'd also say what date range a delegation is covering off, and you might say, well, from tomorrow through to the next week, I'm away on holiday, and save that, and the system will know that, and as an invoice is assigned to me as a user, it can be delegated automatically, in this case to Angeline, and she can do that for me on my behalf, and you can pass your rights and authorities on to the person you've delegated to as part of this process. Okay. The other things that are obviously important in here is that people forget to do things, so there's some escalation inside of ApprovalPlus. So for example, if I've forgotten to approve an invoice after 5 days, I'll be sent an automated reminder to remind me of the things that are outstanding on my list. And really, I guess the concept is that we keep on tuning the tasks that need to be done, and get them through the process and get them ready to be paid. And then the ERP system can be updated with all those invoices by the accounts payable team. Okay, so let's pop out now to the OCR tool, and this one we're using called Extractor. It's built in to work with ApprovalPlus really well. And the concept is an invoice will come in to your accounts payable email account. You create a mail rule on that account to auto forward invoices off to Extractor, and Extractor will be looking for those emails to come in and start processing them. And you're either going to have invoices coming in and they'll all work. So for example, my ones that say indexing here, it's found everything that it needed, and those ones can pass straight through the process into ApprovalPlus. In my demo environment, we've got them to stop and go into an indexing state so we get a chance to have a look at them and show you them. So how the OCR process works is it's using the invoice image, and it's looking for key bits of information on that document to pass through into the process of matching to purchase orders or getting people to code and approve. And we do a lot of things to help that process. So for example, here we've sought the GST number off the invoice, so it's found it down here, and it does that by using keywords like GST number, GST owner, a number in the right format. It's looked that up and found the resulting supplier number and name from our address book from the finance system. It's then gone on and to find things like the invoice date and invoice number off the invoice, and the same thing, it's looking for the words invoice date, or it may be just looking for a date somewhere near the invoice number and things. So it's got a bit of a structure of how an invoice is laid out and the sorts of words and terms that suppliers will commonly use on an invoice for us to use. Okay, and if it goes wrong and it found things in the wrong place, it's quite easy to teach it. So for example, if I just clicked in the invoice number field here and said I want to teach it there, then it's, in this case, you can see it's blue highlighted, it's got a bit of specific learning on it, and next time it'll know for this supplier, look near these words in this space for the invoice number. And you give that a few samples of specific teaching like that per supplier if you need to, and it'll learn those things as we go. The other thing that we'll build into the workflow here is some checks and balances on things. So for example, here we can see that it's found the subtotal, the tax, and the grand total off the invoice, and it's done some maths on that to make sure that that's all worked. So for example, if it had found the subtotal incorrectly, and maybe I'll just give it a number somewhere, so that one will do. It's got some, knows that it's found a subtotal and some tax and a grand total, but that says, well, there's something wrong with that. You know, those things don't add up, therefore something is wrong. And so you would direct your accounts payable person into this document, and they would come in here and say, oh, that subtotal was being picked up in the wrong place, and teach the system where to find it. And you'll see it's all gone green at that stage because it's recalculated things and made sure that the maths is working properly at that point, and this one can continue on. We can also look for other things as part of this process. You'll see that it's highlighted the bank account number down here on the invoice. We can grab that off the invoice and compare that to the bank account number in the finance system as an example, and look, you know, has the supplier changed their bank account number, or has this invoice come in from a person who's trying to commit fraud against us and put their own bank account number on here. So we can sort of use that as part of the process to make sure we're checking things right up front as the invoice is received by the organisation. We also might be looking for other bits of information, such as what the currency is on the invoice. This one doesn't have it, so we can default that in based on the setup in your finance system as to what currency we should be paying and things like that. So we do some lookups as required. And we might also be looking at where this email came from. So it might have come into a particular branch of your organisation, then been forwarded on to the OCR tool. And we can say, well, therefore it goes back to a particular business unit, and it might help with the coding process, or who to give the invoice to is to help with that automation. Okay, so that's the OCR piece. We would then output that invoice and it would go back into ApprovalPlus. It's either going to automatically match to a purchase order or automatically be assigned to a user, or maybe if it doesn't have any of the attributes that we can do some automation, it might drop into the queue for an accounts payable person to look at. And they would come in here and say, I need to have a look at this invoice and maybe assign it to a user to code, for example. Okay. In this particular case, we've got it dropping into someone to look at, and we've actually got my name defaulted in, so you can have people just set up as the default user to view things and do things for you as well. Okay, so they're the general workflows of an invoice and how they go through organization in a purchase order, and you'd obviously match an invoice to a purchase order as required if needed manually, or it can be automatically done too. The other things that are going to go on in this process are people creating expense claims for costs that they've incurred for the business, or processing their credit card transactions. And for this, I'm going to go into a slightly different web page. I'm going to make it a bit smaller because we're potentially doing this on a mobile device such as your phone. I'm going to log into this, and the expense claim is starting from an empty sheet, if you like. So you've been somewhere and you bought something. So you start on an expense claim, and you're going to go through the process of telling someone what it is you need to claim. Now, I've already started some here, but I'm going to add to this claim. So if I say I'm doing an expense, and your administrators can set up different expense types, so the users don't have to worry about GL codes. So just said I went and bought some coffee, and it was $12, and it was a cafe today, and it was some team drink. Okay, maybe you get them to choose a cost center and things like that, or it might be defaulted in. Based on the codes you select, it might default some other fields or ask for people to choose one. And then again, you need someone to approve it. So I can choose Angeline from me as my manager, for example, to approve this. And the system's going to prompt us to add a photo of our transaction. Now, I'm not on my phone when I'm doing this demo, but if you're on your phone, you just take a photo with your camera at that stage. I'm just going to attach an image here instead. Okay, so the idea is you can keep on adding expense claims, and you may have different types you allow users to do. So for example, they might have mileage or per diems, and I know special prices that people can do per day and things like that. So you can do those sorts of claims, and the idea is they may not need a receipt, and you can submit those things into the process and send those off for approval. Okay, credit cards are fairly similar. The difference is we're getting a feed from your bank of your credit card statements for each of your card holders, splitting that feed up and sending it to each card holder so that they get their statement, and they come in here, and really it's very similar to the expense claim. They're just applying the transaction type to the transaction, attaching an image and sending that on. So in this particular case, let's have a look, we'll change this one. This was how it would look when it came in from the supplier, as we know who the supplier was and how much it was, but we need to apply a type of transaction. So for example, I might say this is photocopying, choose a business unit, choose an approver, add our photo, which I've already done, and save that. And so the idea is you'd go through your credit card statement and go through each of those transactions and do all of those and submit that off for approval. And the idea is once these transactions are off for approval, it's back in the main application, and an approver can see the expense claims or the credit card statements that they're approving, and those transactions will be merged along with the other invoices and things and be ready to send off to the finance system once approved. Okay, so this is the batching screen that the accounts payable person would use to go and send things to the ERP system after approval, and you can automate this or you can have this done manually, so some will choose different ways. So we can see all the transactions have come through, and there might be invoices and credit cards and expense claims coming through this process. And people might choose to filter on certain dates and things like that, so they can choose invoice date ranges or certain companies and currencies and things as part of this process. Or they may even just want to review some of these transactions, so you can drill into any of these things and look at the transaction detail, just like we saw when we were creating it and doing some approvals and things before. You can drill into these transactions and see what you need to see. Okay, and really from there, once you've done your reviews and you're happy you want to send things, you select the ones you want to send, either by clicking on the ones you want to do or send all of them or filter it, and you send those off to the ERP system. It's going to create a batch and push those into the ERP system with links back to the images that are stored inside of ApprovalPlus. Okay, so that's the general flow of all the documents that go through the system, obviously you need some administration of some of those things to help maintain what people do in that process. So if we have a quick look at the admin function here, have a look at a user setup. And in this case, I'm just going to have a look at my login profile. So we provide a little summary report all about the user. So it's saying, what their home business unit is, how much approval limit they have, what sort of tasks they can do, which business units or companies they have access to in the organization, other people that are connected to them in the process. And the idea is that all those things are controlled by the system, and if you set it up in the right way, users don't have to know those things. When they go to choose an approver, the system will present people who can approve things for them, and it's all going to be based on a few things. So let's have a look at the tasks. So for example, I can approve a purchase order and an invoice and raise expense claims and things. It says those things, but to limit which parts of the organization I can do, we can say per role, and it might be all roles, or just say, for example, invoice approving. You can give someone access to a certain company and add that, and they'll get all business units or cost centers that are a part of that company. Or you might want to be specific and say only a particular part of the business that they're going to have access to, or even more detailed, you can say for a particular GL code range. So for example, I'm saying from vehicles through land improvements, I could have a different approval limit. And the idea is you can set all those things up in the background, and as invoices come in and people try to choose the right people to do things, the system's going to help prompt that by suggesting the right ones or giving them a list of people who can do those things. And that might be by supplier or by GL code range or by business unit or by company that you can set that up. Okay, and really the concept here is you can copy one user's details to another, and you can create your users how you want them to control things. And so a lot of our organizations will have exceptions set up. So for example, you might have a person who works for the IT help desk. They can approve up to $500 for most operational stuff. They can't approve any capital spend. But for toner cartridges, they've got a special approval limit of up to $2,000. Or for IT equipment, they're allowed to spend up to $5,000 with a particular supplier. And the idea is that all those things can be built into the standard part of the system so that the general managers and the divisional managers and things don't have to see every invoice. If it's a normal thing and you've delegated those tasks to those users, you can let them do that as part of their job. Okay, so that's kind of most of what I want to show you on ApprovalPlus. It's there's a lot of other features and little options and things along the way that you can use, but it's an easy to use system. It's something that's not hard to teach your team to use, and quite often they'll only be entering invoices or approving purchase orders, fairly easy tasks, and you just give them a small video recording of one of those tasks and set them loose, and they'll be away quite easily. So it's a cloud-based solution, so the access to it from any device from anywhere. You can you're paying for the use of it rather than buying it and owning it, and all of the service includes the storage of your data, the backups of your information, and ongoing enhancements and upgrades are all included in the service fee that you're paying. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of what ApprovalPlus is all about, and just please feel free to ask some questions and feed anything through to the team, and we'd be happy to help you. Thank you.